I'm going to share with you the 5 career tips that every woman should know, but most don't. Not only am I going to share these tips with you, I'm also going to share concrete steps that you can take to put these tips into action. All right, let's get into it. Number 1 is to advocate for yourself. Women are rock stars at advocating for those they love, but can suck at advocating for themselves. Yep, I said it because I get it. I would go to the ends of the earth to advocate for my son, but when it comes to myself, when I ask for things that I know I deserve at work, I still tend to feel either pushy or just ungrateful for what I have. Does this sound familiar? Unfortunately, there's still the narrative in society that women should put other people's needs before them. And then when we do advocate for ourselves, we are labeled. We're labeled as aggressive or assertive. But so what? Wouldn't you rather receive some label of being pushy, but get the raise that you deserve? And once you start advocating for yourself, then other women will see that and they'll realize not only is it acceptable, but it is encouraged as well. You're going to set yourself up for success as well as future generations to come. So if you are wanting that raise, go ask for it. Or if you are looking to take on a new opportunity, raise your hand for it. Or push back if you feel as though you are getting work dumped on you. Now I'm going to share with you 3 ways that you can advocate more effectively. The first one is to authentically be yourself. Now, if you're not comfortable walking into the boss's office and saying, I demand a raise, then don't ask for it that way. The last time I asked for an off-cycle raise, which was last year, I know myself and I wanted to be authentic to myself. So I composed an email that listed out what I felt as though I deserved and why I deserved it. And then I requested a meeting to meet with my boss. So however you approach advocating for yourself, do so in a way that is authentic to you. Now, number 2 is to back it up. Always come prepared. The more that you're prepared with quantifiable information, including numbers and data points, the more likely you are to get a yes. And third is to let them. Look, you cannot control what somebody else thinks or says. So if they're going to think that you're pushy or say that you're assertive, let them. Focus on what is in your control, not on what you can't control. And number 2 is to keep your resume up to date and ready to go at any time. So I have a question for you. When is the last time that you updated your resume? Seriously, when was it? I'm going to venture and say it might have been the last time you interviewed for a position, which may have been years ago. And I get it. It's normal, right? You get the job, you put the resume away, you don't really want to think about it again until you have to apply for another position. But every time that happens, there is a sense of being overwhelmed, not knowing what to say, and then just putting it back away and dealing it with another time. But what if there is a better way? Well, there is. And that is to set aside 30 minutes a month to update your resume. Now, the way to go about this is during those 30 days, anytime something major happens at work, write it down. Did you get a promotion? Write it down. Did you take on a new project or finish a new project? Write that down. Or were there any trainings or courses that you went through? Write those down. And then during those allotted 30 minutes each month, simply update your resume. Not only are you going to have all that information at hand, the information is going to be fresh and it's going to make it a whole heck of a lot easier to keep your resume ready to go, because you never know when an opportunity might pop up and you want to be prepared. Number 3 is to stop apologizing. Oh, this is a big one. And unfortunately, I see this in women more than I do in men. The last position that I was interviewing for as the interviewer, I interviewed 2 candidates who had career breaks. One was a woman and one was a man. The woman apologized 3 times during the interview for her career break. I actually had to pause the interview and tell her there was no need to apologize. On the flip side, The man simply addressed the fact that yes, he had been on a career break. This is what he had learned during that time, and that's why he believed he was a great candidate for the position that he was interviewing for. And not only do I see it in interviews, I also see it when there is somebody wants to put a meeting on the calendar. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, but do you have some time to have a meeting later this afternoon? Nope. Stop apologizing. Simply saying, hey, just checking to see when you would have some time to meet. If you don't have a reason, a true reason to apologize, then don't. And if you do find yourself saying sorry a lot, simply replace that with excuse me. It changes the dynamic drastically. And number 4 is to take on something that scares you at work. I remember when I started in HR, I was strictly doing recruiting. And my boss asked me if I would like to take on some training for our new hire orientation. And I said, no, thank you. At that point, I realized it wasn't so much a request as it was a directive. I ended up taking on some of the facilitation of the new hire training, and I loved it. I truly did. And from there, I went on to do more training for our management and in-house staff, as well as joining Toastmasters and eventually becoming a college professor. Now, I'm not saying that everything that you take on that's a challenge is going to end up being your passion, but you never know. It might be. And the worst case scenario is when you step outside of your comfort zone, you are forced to learn and to grow. And that is going to be beneficial in so many ways, not just in your career, but for yourself as well. And tip number 5 is to be the person that you wish you had at the beginning of your career. Now, I remember the very first job I had out of college, and it was for a major law firm. I was a fish out of water. I felt overwhelmed and lost and like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? And I eventually did receive another job offer, which I took. So it was about 5.5 months and I had given my notice, and I got invited out to lunch by one of the secretaries, which was so random because I had never been invited out to lunch. And during that lunch, several other secretaries had joined us. And they said, you know what, we're really sad to see you go. And I was like, well, that's weird because I never even really talked to you guys. It turns out that they had an unofficial rule, and that was any woman that was newly hired, if they made it to 6 months, they would join the inner circle, the circle of support. And I was floored. Being a new grad, I had no idea that that was how women treated other women. And from that moment on, I made it my mission to say, okay, that is not how I am going to treat anybody who is new to a company. And that's what I challenge you to do. I challenge you to be the person you wish you had when you started out your career. So be the person that invites them out to lunch, that shows them the ropes, that is their mentor. Just imagine if you and all the other women in the workforce lifted up the people coming up behind us, and we created a supportive, inclusive workforce. Just imagine what that would do, not just for you, not just for that other person, but for women in the workforce as a whole. All right, so there you go. Those are my 5 career tips that really aren't talked about, but would truly benefit you. Number 1 is to advocate for yourself, because if you're not going to do it, nobody else is going to do so. Number 2 is to always keep your resume up to date and ready to go so you're not going to miss out on any potential opportunities. And number 3 is to stop apologizing. You know when apologizing is appropriate and when it's not. And when it's not, don't do it. Number 4 is to step outside of your comfort zone and take on something that challenges you. Not only will you grow career-wise, but you'll also grow personally. And finally, number 5, be the person you wish you had at the beginning of your career. Remember, no one is going to be more invested in your career than you are. So go out there and start investing in it. And if you'd like to learn some pretty unique interview tips you might not have heard before, make sure to check out the video here.